These past 10 or 12 weeks, however long it's been that we've been in this shutdown, time ceases to exist, strangely, have been a time of great tension. And to me, a lot of that tension has to do with not knowing. So I don't know about you, but every morning I read through the newspapers. I try and glean some information about, anything I can learn about this pandemic, trying to figure out when we might be able to get back to normal, whatever that normal is. And really what I want to know is, when are we going to be able to worship? When are we going to fill this room again with our people? When are we going to start singing to God all together in one voice as we're accustomed to doing? Because I miss that. I miss it deeply. I really feel as though in a lot of ways that I've been living like just sitting on the edge of my seat. So there's just that deep tension because I don't know if we're going to be open in 3 weeks or in 2 months or whatever. So kind of have to be constantly ready, constantly alert. And it's a difficult way to live. So I was discussing this with Session last night. Session is our governing body of our church, for those who aren't familiar with our structure here. And we're talking about these issues. And so we made a determination that we are not going to open the building for in-person worship, at least until the first week of September. Now, of course, in the meantime and following that, we're going to be listening for guidelines from both the provincial and local health authorities. But we've decided that instead of sitting on the edges of our seats, we're going to actually sit back and actually experience this moment, because we haven't quite committed to being in shutdown. But of course, we can't be committed to opening either. So we're in this weird little liminal state. So as long as we find ourselves here, perhaps we ought to be intentional about it, and we ought to embrace the circumstance in which we find ourselves. And so we've made that decision that during June, July, and August, we're not going to have in-person worship. Now, I'd like to borrow a phrase from the Anglican Church. So the bishop that oversees all of Ontario, her name is Reverend Anne Germond, and she has encouraged both the clergy and the laity to observe a sacred Sabbath rest over these summer months. And I really like that language. And I would like to encourage us to do the same. Now, a Sabbath, of course, is a time that's set apart. So where we pause from our daily hustle and bustle, and we just sit back, and we lift our eyes to heaven, and we look for God. We look for God's presence in our lives. We look for God's nudging, God's direction. And we try and figure out where we should be going, rather than just continuing to blindly march along. And so I actually quite like that image, that appeals to me. And so I would encourage us all to, as we're shut down over the summer, to treat this not as this liminal time of we're neither in nor out, hot nor cold, but actually we have a purpose, and that purpose is to discern, to prayerfully listen for God's guidance. Now, although the building will remain closed as it is now, that certainly doesn't mean that it's a time of inactivity. Certainly between Session and myself, we have to answer all kinds of questions so that we're ready for our opening when it comes. So we have to figure out how many people are going to fit in this room with social distancing. Do we have to have multiple services? Can we have a choir? Are we able to sing together? What do we do about communion? Can we have coffee hour afterwards? We've got to buy more hand sanitizer stations and put them around, adjust our cleaning schedules, figure out how do we meet people when they come in the door. Normally we greet people, but we want to maintain distance. We can't touch them. How do we serve dinners? Our barbecues that we have. I don't even know if I'm able to baptize anybody at this point. I don't know if I can touch them. Somehow baptizing somebody with gloves on seems strangely odd. And then, of course, we've embraced a lot of technological changes over the shutdown. We have to figure out how would we continue that. So it's one thing for me to stand here in an empty room and tape a message, but how do we do that during a live service? So there's lots of questions. And in the meantime, of course, we'll continue doing our worship on Facebook and on YouTube, plus these messages, these devotionals and random thoughts that I have that I put out there. So we'll continue all of that. So although it's a period of shutdown, it is certainly not a period of inactivity. And actually, I kind of picture it in my head as that moment, when the cats crouch down and they start wiggling their tail, they're lashing their tail, and they're just getting ready to burst into great activity. So I kind of picture us as being in one of those times right now, which is exciting. It's a time of preparation. So as a session, by delimiting this time, by seeking to define this time of shutdown, this time of Sabbath, we're hoping that by doing this that we will reduce the tension that comes with not knowing, with not having any idea what to expect, and sitting on the edge of our seats, so to speak, for the entire summer. So I pray that you will take this Sabbath period, and that for you it will be a time of rest, of reflection, and a time of renewal. And may the Lord bless you richly as you take the time to seek His good and His perfect will.